Good morning. And it's a privilege to be able to welcome you to this opening discussion of this day at the New York Encounter and to be here with you. My name is Paolo Carozza. I'm from the University of Notre Dame, where I direct the Kellogg Institute for International Studies. I'm here to moderate this discussion today on the quest to reduce extreme poverty. The question of extreme poverty in the world is always present, of course, but has been brought to our attention in recent months and in the last year in particularly prominent and pointed ways in a couple of different contexts. Here in New York, debate and discussion and adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals, for example, set us on a path, gave us an agenda for the coming years on how to address some of these issues globally through international institutions and international cooperation. Pope Francis, in a similar way, and yet in his inimitably distinct way, also brought to our attention in Laudato Si the big structural questions and causes of not only environmental degradation, the theme which attracted the most public attention of his encyclical, but even more than that, the questions of social exclusion, marginalization, misdevelopment and underdevelopment, and global poverty generally, calling us to a new form of solidarity and social charity. We've been working on this problem for decades. Of course, the problem of global poverty. For 50, 60, 70 years at least, there have been international efforts on a systemic basis to try to address them. So why is it still with us on such a massive scale? Notwithstanding all these decades of work, how much have we really achieved? By some measures, really a lot, actually. The share of people living in poverty globally has never been lower in human history, and by a good measure. In 1981, for example, so not that long ago, more than 50% of the people in the world lived in absolute poverty. That's down to less than 14% today by the same measure. And poverty today globally is falling more quickly than it ever has before in all of human history. The world collectively attained the first of the Millennium Development Goals targets to cut the 1990 poverty rate in half by 2015, 5 years early, in 10 years, it was achieved. So at least by measures of income, a great deal has been achieved by anti-poverty efforts in recent years. And beyond income, we could say similar things about global health, decreasing mortality, especially among children and infants, and so forth. And yet, why does the problem still trouble us so much? Well, because there's plenty beyond those measures to indicate to us that the problem of extreme poverty is still massive and acute. Consider a few other basic facts about today's world. Notwithstanding our progress, over 1.3 billion people continue to live in what the World Bank considers to be absolute poverty. If you move the measure of what counts as poverty up to a mere $2.50 a day of income, that number of poverty increases to about 50% of the global population, 3 billion people. At least 80% of all of humanity lives still on less than $10 a day. 1 billion of those poor people are children. According to UNICEF, 22,000 children a day die because of poverty-related causes. And most of those measures just track income. Again, if we go beyond to other multidimensional measures of poverty that take into account education, health, overall well-being, psychology, spiritual development, the presence of violence, then truly extreme poverty remains a massive, almost unimaginable global problem. It's not just a sea that we are afraid of, but an ocean. So how can we face the problem of global poverty today and the problem of extreme poverty with any sense of hope, with any sense of possibility that these waters are navigable, that we can do something about it without being oppressed and discouraged by our incapacity to face the basic needs of our brothers and sisters elsewhere in the world? There is undoubtedly, for so many of us, a temptation to just, you could say, stay home. Especially those of us who are, on a daily basis, as my children often like to say, beset and concerned with our, quote, first world problems. The first world problems tag is maybe a useful one to begin our reflection on, because part of the question before us is whether the problem of extreme poverty is just a problem that is out there, elsewhere in the world, a problem of them, or is it a problem of us? Is it a problem also of our own hearts, our own fears of facing ourselves, the way that we live, the way that we relate to the reality of the world and to the meaning of things, to our everyday experience? So in the end, facing it as a reflection about ourselves and not merely about some detached and abstracted conditions somewhere else in the world, the question of our quest to reduce extreme poverty becomes this, in important part. What allows us still to face this challenge with energy, with positivity, with hope, with a certainty that there is a good to be sought that is attainable? To help to answer that question, the New York Encounter has assembled a wonderful panel of participants with a range and diversity of experiences to help us reflect on this. I will introduce them all right away so that afterwards we can have much more of an uninterrupted discussion rather than a set of separated presentations. So intervening first, immediately to my left, will be Joakim Koech, who is the principal of the Cardinal Maurice Otunga High School in Nairobi, Kenya. Founded in 2005 and further developed with the help of the Association of Volunteers in International Service, or AVSI, the school aims to develop students' awareness of themselves as human beings, with a particular focus on needy students who would not otherwise have access to schooling. Joakim spent 16 years as a teacher, coach, and deputy principal. He's the former chair of the Cardinal Otunga Charitable Trust and the co-editor of Reality and Education. He holds a master's in education and curriculum studies from the University of Nairobi. Second to my right, Jackie Aldrette is the managing director for AVSI-USA, which is the liaison office for AVSI Foundation in the United States. Jackie serves as the focal point for U.S. government relations for the entire AVSI network, including local partners present in 30 countries around the world. She has served as the new business program manager for AVSI-USA for the last 10 years, supporting its efforts to diversify funding sources and build a foundation of strategic partnerships with U.S. government, donor agencies, international financial institutions, foundations, individuals, and universities, including my own. And third, to the far left, is Christian Blattman, Associate Professor of Political Science and International Affairs at Columbia University. Besides being a research fellow with various academic institutes, he leads the Peace and Recovery Program at Innovations for Poverty Action, a well-known research institute, as well as the Politics, Institutions, and Conflict Initiative at Columbia University's Center for Development Economics and Policy. Chris was previously on the faculty at Yale University. He holds a PhD in economics from the University of California, Berkeley, and a master's in public administration and international development at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. So you see, we have a range of experiences from Joakim, who works most directly with students in his native Nairobi. Jackie brings to us a perspective informed by years working with an international development NGO. And Chris Blattman, from the world of academics, perhaps works on, in the broadest way, on the intellectual and research questions that emerge from all of this work. So we'll begin with Joakim. Joakim, can you tell us a little bit about what you do and, more importantly, why you do it and what can we learn from it?
Thank you, Paolo, and good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here with you. My first time to be in America, and especially also to be in New York, and I never expected to be here, but now I'm here. And also, this is interesting because it's a journey that has happened for my life that also has reached this level that has brought me here. If I was to imagine back several years ago, I could not think that I would be here talking about my life, talking about the work that I'm doing. Because when I finished college, I trained as a teacher, but after college I didn't want to teach because I thought it was too little. I wanted to be rich. I wanted to be a businessman. I wanted to make money, and therefore this is what I did. I went out after college, and I started to do some as an entrepreneur for 2 years. And when I was thinking about this was a project that I had. I wanted to make a good transport business. And in Kenya, we have small minibuses of 14 passengers, 18. And with some money, some contributions, I bought one. And this is a business I started with. And I was imagining myself in several years owning a fleet of this kind of cars. But incidentally, one day, the principal of my high school met me on the road and he asked me, please help me, I need a teacher of Swahili. My teacher has been transferred. Can you stand in for him? So I said, okay, maybe in the morning when I'm free. So he said, please, maybe in the morning, 2 hours. This is what happened. I went there for 2 hours, and now I'm here. This, among other things, when I put together, has shown me really what it means that the path of life, we have an imagination of the path, and we have some instances of life that help us to discover this path that is useful for us unexpectedly. Now, he's asking me a big question, but we don't do development in school. But at the same time also, when we teach, I think this happens. Now, when I went back to school, I did not know really what I wanted to tell the students. I did not know what I wanted to teach them. This is why in the first place I was not comfortable to go. And after working in the public school, I did very well because in a few years I was promoted to be the deputy principal in a big school. And because I was very tough with the students, very strict. And I thought this is the way to teach them, to be tough, to be disciplined. And this is what the parents also liked. This is why they promoted me very fast. But after I went to Nairobi, I was living outside 300 kilometers from the capital city. So I went to Nairobi, and I went to do a master's there because I was going to learn, and I met some friends. During this time, I went to teach in a school, a very good Catholic school. And that time also, I met some friends. One called Father Valerio, one called Paolo Sana, Stefano Montecini, my friends that were teachers in other schools. And they were reading a book called The Risk of Education. So I met them because my wife was working with AVSI, so that's how I met these friends of mine. Now, it was very interesting because that time when I was teaching in another school, it was just part-time, I asked one thing that really disturbed me, and this I think is connected to what really means that why sometimes poverty remains, why the things don't change, is because the way someone looks at you, the way someone treats you, the way someone takes care of you, already gives an expression. Because in this school, it was a very good school. But I always say this story because it was really what changed also my perception about teaching. It was a very well-done school, very good buildings. But what was missing was the toilets. The toilets were outside the class, without doors and without lights. So imagine the students there to use this in the evening. It's dark. You have to go to a toilet outside outside the building. It was and in the morning, they were very dirty. And some of the students had to wash this. I was very uncomfortable with this. So we spoke with my friends, again, because we were meeting these teachers, this Father Valerio, Paolo Sana, these other people. And I was saying, there's something that I really am a bit uncomfortable about this school. We are doing well, but there's something that is really, in the evening, the students have to go to this toilet that was very, very, it's it's very dirty. And then also, imagine that it's a boarding school, 400 students. So in the evening, they have to use these toilets, maybe 6 of them without the doors. So the one is waiting for you. Can you imagine that people are waiting outside there and you're there? So we're saying, but how can what is missing in this? What is missing in this good school? Because it was a good school. It was doing very well. The building was really well done. It was done by missionaries before. So this provoked me a lot. And with these friends, we were saying, but is it possible to find a place that we can look at our students in a different way? This was a question that we started to think about. Is it possible for us to find a place that we can look at the students in a different way? And this happened. Cardinal Otunga School was born from this dialogue that we were having. Is it possible to find a place that we can really dialogue about what it means to teach, to educate, to take care of the students? And we didn't have anything. But as I was saying, some signs also show that, because when we spoke with AVSI, with some friends, immediately they were ready to support us, and we started the school. I'm relating this because it's been a great help for me to understand why people don't change. They don't change because sometimes that is how we look at them, that it's okay. That you can have very good things, but others it doesn't matter. So it's not total change, it's not total awareness. So I'm not changed completely. My way of looking at the reality, my way of looking at the other person is not changed. And I'm grateful, this is why I'm here, I'm grateful because I met these friends of mine that they told me about a priest called Father Giussani. And he's concerned about the education and he's concerned about the young people. Just to give, after when we went to school, the first day when we opened the school, when we opened the gate of the school, the parents came of this. We have children from able families, but also quite a number of children from very poor backgrounds. So when the first day we opened the gate of the school, some parents of these children, when they arrived at the gate, the school was done very well. It's clean, and so when they reached the gate of the school, some of them removed the shoes. They say, well, we cannot step on this because it's very clean. And then when we went round, they say, some mothers cried, and they were asking, but are you sure this is for my son? You say, yes. But why? Because we don't even pay a single shilling, but why do you build something like this for him? This also became something else for me, because from that moment, I knew that this mother taught me something, that sometimes we take things for granted, but her reaction was, we don't deserve, but we already given. We don't deserve, but we already have something in front of us that is beautiful. So I learned from her. And staying with my students became, this is the point that I want them, when they arrive in school, they have this feeling that their life is great. They can perceive it when they enter the gate, that their life is great. And the consequence of this awareness, of this dialogue amongst ourselves, the teachers and the students, because with the teachers we started to speak about what does it mean? There was an article that I read once about a friend of Father Giussani called Piccinini. And Father Giussani was asking him, so how do you know that you love your children? He says, in the evening when I arrive, because I don't want to disturb them, I tiptoe to the bedroom, I kiss each one of them, and so this, and he feels good after when he sees all of them asleep and he has kissed them. And then Father Giussani says, but that is not enough, because if you love them very much, then the question that will come is, but what will happen to them? What is their destiny? This question has also become my question when I go to school. When I see them coming to school, I say, what will happen to them? And this is the work that we do with the teachers. We speak about ourselves. What about us? What will happen to us? What will happen to these students? And for this, it's become useful for us as teachers and the students. The students start to grow, start to take their life seriously. But above all, what has happened is that I'm saying I was the first one that started to change. The way I look at myself, the way I look at the work, the way I look at my children. And then the teachers also, and the students. And for this, what has happened is that we have had very good results. This time, not because I was very strict or very, you see how it happens. Like before, I was having very good results, very demanding, but now the results were coming in a different way. Out of a gratitude, out of an awareness that somebody wants to struggle. They want to make a difference. They want to keep the school clean. They want to take care of their children and their families. And teachers now, they work more. There's a teacher that wanted to transfer, but he came and told me, I can't. When I think about the work that we're doing here, how it has been useful for me and my children, I would like to give more time, and I would like to make these children also do well. And our students have grown for this reason. So I could give you many, but I think at the core of change, the hope that has pushed me is that when I started to, my eyes was, like the consciousness of myself, when it happened for me, and the change that I perceived, and the desire that this is really what I want to express. Because I started to take care of myself, and I wanted to express this to my students, and I see this happening, and this is my hope, because I see that I'm growing even now. I'm growing every day, and my students are growing, and our teachers are growing, and it makes a big difference. In fact, I always say, even if everything goes wrong, I'm certain of this fact that something has happened that has made me different, change. And I can express this to my students.
Thank you, Joakim, thank you. Jackie.
Well, so my story is quite different from that of Joakim's, but, and my daily work as well. So as Paolo mentioned, I work at AVSI-USA, which is the US branch of this international nonprofit organization, AVSI, which was started in the early 1970s by some people of the movement of community liberation. So my daily work is primarily in four different areas. First, we try to find opportunities for funding for AVSI projects in Africa, Latin America, from US government agencies, which requires a lot of effort and a lot of networking. And then secondly, we raise money from individuals to enable AVSI to respond to crises and emergencies around the world where we're able to. Also, we work with foundations, which is a really important part of our job because it allows us to respond to really concrete needs with our partner organizations on the ground and fill in some gaps from what we're able to fundraise from individuals and from other donors to respond to concrete needs such as building a classroom or putting books in libraries, that kind of thing. And then we also connect the world of AVSI, this network of AVSI and all of our partners with universities, with students interested in doing internships. We try to do some research into our work to try to understand it better. This is the kind of thing that we're involved in on a daily basis. So how did I get into this? And I'd like to share just a little bit of my story and the growth that I've had to go through in staying in front of this desire as Paolo launched the question to us. So I come from a background probably similar to most of us, many of you, middle-class American family, growing up with a good education, lots of opportunities. As I was, getting through my college years, I had basically two main questions that were really driving me. One was, how can I reconcile my life, everything that I've been given, with what I had seen, the poverty and the suffering, inequality of opportunities that I had seen around the world in my travels. This was a big question for me, and one that I felt could easily be tapped down, pushed away, and just kind of go on with life and as if it didn't exist. But I knew that I didn't really want to do that. I wanted to take it seriously. The other question that was really burning in me at that time, and I'm talking around the year 2000, in which everyone was talking about globalization and these big economic forces connecting the world, creating opportunities, and yet putting in our face the stark contrasts in terms of how we live here in the US and the life of so many people around the world. And so the intuition in front of that was that globalization must have something to offer for the world's poor, and even the poor in our own countries. And why can't we figure out some ways of tapping into all this power, all this opportunity, all this economic excess, and somehow address suffering, address poverty. So with these questions, I decided to kind of pursue an international career, and when I discovered that there was this whole field of international organizations engaged right here and right there in that intersection, it was like a big aha moment. Like this is an amazing thing, right? I'm going to be paid potentially to work for an organization that serves the poor. Fantastic. That meets all my needs. And then when I came across AVSI, again, it was an amazing opportunity for me because not only was it a chance to discover what it means to work on behalf of the poor of the world and tap into some of the resources of the US, of the developed world, on behalf of communities around the world, but doing so within a Catholic perspective and within a perspective that I'm also serving the church. So on a certain level, I have an amazing job. I'm very happy with that, and that's great. And it's an opportunity to address this question of what could we do to help the poor in a really concrete way. But the journey that I've been on has been interesting, because to stay in front of that is not automatic and it's not simple. I'm really helped by something an encounter and a judgment that I received at the beginning of my time with AVSI from my very dear colleague Ezio, who many of you know, who's also dedicated most of his professional life to work with AVSI. Early in my time with AVSI, we were sitting around and we were talking with some other people about why we do this work. And he put it this way. He said that we don't do this work because we have something to offer someone else. We don't have a solution to someone else's problems. Instead, we do this work because we have received something. We do this work because we have been loved. And so maybe the difference is a little bit subtle, and maybe at first I thought I understood that, but it's been a work for me to really understand what that means. And I'm really grateful for it, because in those moments in which I don't have that clarity of why I'm doing this work, sometimes even the tasks can seem mundane, since most of my day is spent, with a computer, with a budget, with a project proposal, and not, embracing the poor in a physical, concrete way. I have to go back to that question, to that starting point, and say, okay, is this about me? Is this about what I can do? Is this about what I can produce or solve? Or is my interest in the life of someone who I don't know, who's far away, does that come from somewhere else, right? And does my response to that come from a really deep sense of my own belonging and the fact that I've met something that gives my life meaning? So I would say that some of the risks, some of the reductions that I fall into in approaching this work is, on one level, a kind of intellectualism. You can kind of think about poverty in a very academic, intellectual kind of way, and kind of forget the human person that you're actually working for, and forget that the human person is also a free being. And so we have to resist the temptation to think about solutions to poverty that are systems and policies that then are going to, quote unquote, solve problems. I struggle with a romantic idea of what it means to serve the poor, in the sense that sometimes my struggle is from the heart, the desire to embrace, to be close to the people who I believe I'm serving. And then again, I think a struggle that many of us, I think you might face in other types of work as well, is that of kind of putting yourself at the center of what you're doing. So starting to get caught up with your results as the definition of how well you're working, right? So what helps me stay in front of this big desire, which started everything, right, which got me here, is going back to that, is being really open to that question of what is it that I hope for my life, what I hope to do with my work. And that I've learned over time that question needs to be also really rooted in reality, in objective work and circumstances that I've been given. So I just want to share one little story that was really useful for me, a moment of growth for me in this. So about a year and a half ago, I was kind of feeling this dissatisfaction with work, right? Feeling like I was far away from what I really wanted to be doing. Far away maybe from the core of what AVSI does every day. A little frustrated with my kind of office job, right? And so and I was at the same time, I was planning a mission to Haiti. And so in the back of my mind, one of the reasons I was going to Haiti was to reconnect. I really thought that I was going to reconnect with the poor there and see faces that would help me be more inspired, right? And so I went, and I did meet with a number of, our beneficiaries, the community, the women that we work with, and they were beautiful interactions. And yet, in a few days, you can only interact so much, and I felt I couldn't even really get to know them. And yet, the week was spent mostly with my colleagues, both the international staff who were there and the local staff. And I was really struck by the intensity of our relationship and the way that they stay in front of the poor that they have been given to be with on a more daily basis. I was also struck by the way I was with my colleagues, because I could see a change also in me, and the way that I was asking them questions, helping them to probe also their experience, asking them, why are they doing this work, what keeps them going, and also just helping them to be open to the reality that they were living in. So I came back with this sense of being so honored to work for my staff, our staff. And so it really helped me in this journey of understanding, what does my desire mean, but what does it mean within the concrete job that I've been given, which maybe doesn't match up with my idea, this romantic idea that I had, but is also very fulfilling. And so that's what basically what I think is really useful maybe for everybody is the desires that we have are big, but they have to be in dialogue with reality, and there's a great amount of fulfillment when it's clear to us that we're responding not just to some far-off idea, but to a presence and something that's been asked of me here and now.
Great. Thank you. Chris.
Thank you. So I wanted to be a historian, and I spent a lot of my time, maybe 12 or 15 years ago, in 3 levels underground in a university library collecting statistics on developing countries. And then 12 years ago, I found myself in a town called Kitgum in northern Uganda, and where there was a war ongoing, just the dying days of a 20-year war, 2 million people displaced. And I'd gone there for the noblest of reasons. I'd followed a woman. She was a psychologist. She worked with AVSI, and she was studying how to help people, especially children and women, recover from war. And her passion became my passion. And I began studying the long-term effects of war on children, on youth, and on what recovery might look like, and what it really meant to recover from really what was one of the most disastrous and traumatizing events in human history. And it felt very hopeless at the beginning. The war ended shortly after I started working, and people had lost everything. This was a relatively prosperous corner of Africa. There were more cattle than people at one point, and people had homes and farms, and all of that was gone. People had been displaced into camps, they'd lost everything, and they'd just returned home to desolate fields and houses that had crumbled and no livestock whatsoever. And AVSI had what I would say was a very provocative approach, a very controversial approach. One that I didn't initially believe would work. They would go to these little villages of maybe 100 households who had just returned to their land, and they would find the 15 poorest households, usually women, in what were already maybe one of the poorest places on the planet, maybe the poorest place on the planet. And then they gave them cash. They gave them $150 to help them start a business that might be to go to the market in the capital or not the local capital and bring back and sell oil or matches, or maybe to sell some vegetables, or maybe to buy some livestock. And they would give them a little bit of training and they would give them a little bit of advising, but really these women who had no education in many cases, who had really nothing and no experience, some of them had lived the last 8 years of their life in a displacement camp with no job at all, with no activity whatsoever, and they were supposed to be entrepreneurs and grow rich. And in partly in hope and partly in disbelief, we started a study. We started following these women over several years. We looked at those who received the program in the first year, and there could only serve so many programs. This was intensive. It was a lot of money to raise. Most donors would say, this is crazy. We're not going to give the poorest people in the world a cash handout. They're not going to be business people. And they'll drink it, or they'll waste it. They'll make bad decisions. And if they sell something, they'll sell the same thing that those 5 other people are selling, and nobody will make any money. What do they know? And we followed them, and we followed women who received it, were going to receive it down the road as well. And we could look after a year or two at what the impacts of this idea that AVSI had by contrasting these two groups, those who had received it and those who were about to receive it. And what we saw was astonishing. We saw that, so previously these women might have earned not even $1 a day, maybe a few dollars a week. And they'd started small businesses. They were spending 5 or 10 hours a week tending the livestock and selling the product and selling their goods and becoming basically traders. And they made great decisions. They even though they were selling the same 5 junky things that everybody else was selling, somehow this was actually a shockingly profitable activity. Shockingly profitable in the sense that before they made $3 or $4 a week, now they made $10 a week. So this doesn't sound like a whole lot, but this is in some sense what it means to end extreme poverty. This is the difference, to make it more meaningful, this is the difference between eating once a day and eating twice a day. And eating twice a day is a big deal, right? It wasn't the solution, right? They weren't off earning a wage and a job and sending their children to university, but they were eating twice a day instead of once a day. And we challenged AVSI. We said, what your model, it's wonderful, this seems to be working, but you can only help 1,000 people at a time because you're doing a lot of training, you're doing a lot of advising, there's a lot of hand-holding, it takes a lot of time. You can't help 10,000 people like this, you can't help 100,000, you can't help 100 million, and that's what it means to end extreme poverty. And we said, these women they haven't wasted this money, they've made good decisions. Maybe it's because you helped them, but maybe they can do this on their own. So we challenged them when they helped that second group of women that we'd been comparing to. We said, what if some of them, you just give them the money? You give them money and a day or two of training, and then you see whether they can do this on their own. And most organizations wouldn't do that. That was a brave step. And the women who received some help, of course, they did a little bit better. But not so much better that maybe it justified spending more money than the cash grant itself on helping them sustain their business. The women who just received this helping hand, this cash, started successful businesses. They doubled their income. They ate twice a day instead of once a day. Their children were more likely to go to school and were healthier. And I think what this shows is just that the problem of ending poverty is maybe one of the slowest and most complex and most difficult things in the world. Getting people to have the opportunity to send their children to college and to earn large incomes and have big businesses will be very, very slow, and it will happen. But ending extreme poverty may be a little bit simpler. Helping people go from eating once a day to eating twice a day, and maybe then eventually eating 3 times a day, might be a little bit more straightforward, and it may require a great deal of humility. It might require a great deal more trust and faith in the poor, whom we're often very quick to write off as likely to make bad decisions or incapable of knowing what's best, or wasting or drinking away, or otherwise really requiring us to walk them through the process of development. And I don't think that's true. I think it requires humility, that we need to be willing to put our trust in these people and give them, in this case, the things we need. It so happens this led me in my research career to become one of identifying daring solutions like this and trying to study them and trying to understand what this means about poverty. And both things I've done and things that a dozen other people have done have shown that this same result, giving people cash or cattle or some form of capital around the world, shows very, very similar results. People lurch forward. And I think that you asked why we're hopeful. The reason I'm hopeful of ending extreme poverty is because I think there are basic ingredients that are not that complicated, but that require us to be a great deal less paternalistic and a great deal more humble than we are as a society towards those less fortunate. Thank you.
Well, thanks to all three of you, and we do have some time to engage and follow up on these presentations and put them into conversation with one another a little bit. And so I guess one question that I would like to ask all three of you is that it struck me that from very different sets of experiences and perspectives and in different ways, yet all of you in one way or another emphasized two interrelated things, I think. One is the absence or the impossibility almost of solutions to the problem that are formulaic. Right? There's a formula, you plug it in, if we do this, we solve poverty. A system, right, in a completely dehumanized kind of way. And reciprocally related to that is the presence and need to come to terms with the problem of human freedom. And in particular, the risks that freedom entails. We're setting out in this area, I mean, all of you talked about having to take risks and the uncertainty that dealing with people and their freedom necessarily introduces into that. For a lot of us, that's a source of fear, in a certain sense, right? We want solutions that are certain. We want solutions that are formulaic. We want systems that we can put in place. We can give our money to them, and that's going to solve the problem, and then there's going to be no more child mortality in the world. So could you say a little bit more about where you think the question of freedom and the associated risk that it entails fits into your work? How do you see it? How do you address it? Why is it important? And what can we learn about taking it into account from the perspective of the work that you do? Who would like to begin? Jackie?
Sure. So I think an idea that comes to mind that I think is connected with your question and something that Chris said. Chris put the challenge of scale in front of us, right? The scale of poverty is big. And maybe what we're doing is on such a small scale that you have to ask yourself, is that the best use of resources to make a dent in the problem, to reach any kind of scale? Another big challenging question that we want to be talking about is sustainability. Is what we're doing something that can be sustained over time? Or are we always going to be needed, right? Like Chris also mentioned the idea of paternalism. Are we always going to be needed to be there providing some input? So I bring the question of sustainability and whether our results are lasting up here because I see a connection with risk and freedom. In the sense that what we've learned is that the best bet that we can make with our investment, with our money, with our resources and our time are in those people and those organizations that have come up from the communities themselves to answer to a need that they have identified and that they have the energy and the courage to address. So I feel this is risky in the sense that we as an organization aren't going to define the solution and kind of have control over some package that we deliver, and we can control how it is delivered. But instead, we want to bet on the freedom and the desire and the intelligence and conviction of people themselves. And so our method then becomes one of observing what's happening in the places where we are and seeing where things are growing and trying to put our efforts there. It's sometimes unsatisfying because where we can serve and we can help one school, like Otunga School, where Joakim is, there are many other very worthy schools out there that also need help, and we cannot reach them all. It's true that problem of scale for us is a really good challenge and a dramatic one. But if we can invest in a few places that then can become examples for their community, we think that that's an impact that will last much longer than when we're around or when our money is being used.
Thank you. Anyone else?
In school, I see the risk that really makes a difference is if a student or even a teacher or the people that we work with feels that the way I look at them, because an example is, I'll use it. One, the person that cleans the school compound, he does it very well. And I don't follow him to tell him to do this. But he knows that I really trust him. He knows that I bet on him. And on a Friday evening, he says, so now I have a plan for tomorrow, and then on Sunday, so this I'm going to do. And then on Monday morning, when we arrive, I can see what he has done. He's done a very good job. Sometimes I use it when I'm educating the students to say, but do you see how this guy is working? Do you see how he takes care of everything? Yes. So, when, for example, a student, because I see when we have meetings with the teachers, the doubt that we have on the students. Sometimes we have a lot of doubt because someone is making mistakes, someone is not progressing. But I say, when they come to school, what are they looking for? But what is everyone looking for, even in a very, maybe sometimes unconscious? We're looking for something good for our life. When we wake up in the morning, there is a good that we are looking for. Sometimes it's not very clear. And therefore, if I encounter someone that trusts me as this good starts to come out, to find a way. But if I find someone that doubts me, then this good will never be expressed and will never change me. And I think in the issue of development, because I'm talking at the concrete level of a human person, is how I express, how I look at you. I can tell you are stupid, or I can tell you that, no, you can make mistakes, but it's possible to grow. You can change. I trust in this. And someone perceives this. So if there is someone in front of you that helps you to regain the confidence about life, about meaning, it makes a big difference. And I think this is, for me, an example of development, because if someone gains confidence, he can face life, he can struggle, he can make a lot of changes. But it depends a lot with how I look at. And this is why I was using the example of the toilet, because when my friends told me, there's a lack in this school. Why? Because there's a way of looking at the person that is not complete. So you give them a piece of good building, but there's another way of looking at this person that reduces even the beautiful building. But it's not the total way of looking at this person to say, you are really worth it. Even if everything is not okay, but you are worth everything. So I think with this, someone can make a difference, can change.
Chris, moving to a slightly different area, your work in particular is necessarily and quite amazingly about measurement, right? And measurement in one way or another represents one of the most significant and dramatic changes in the way we work in development in recent years, right? The sophistication of our capacity to measure, the tools that are available, and the omnipresence of efforts to measure. Given that this is your daily fare and your currency and what your contribution is, I wonder if you could share with us a little bit of what you think are both the uses and the value of measurement of these things that we're discussing, and also potentially the limitations of measurement. I mean, where does it fall short? Where maybe the fact that we live in a society in an era that is obsessed with measuring everything and reducing everything to measurement might also impede or blind us to some of the things that are necessary for addressing extreme poverty in a comprehensive way.
So AVSI is a small faith-based organization. I like to say that the U.S. government and the World Bank and the organizations that pour billions into poor countries are also faith-based organizations, but it's a different kind of faith. It's a faith in what they're doing works, and it's a faith that's been based on, I think, very little introspection. And one of the things that's happened in the last 15 years is a push to actually see, okay, of these 43 things that we do every day in every country, I mean, not everything, but we fund job training programs, we support the growth of microfinance institutions, we put in girls' scholarships and textbooks and deworming medicines and all of these things that happen over and over and over again. Some of these probably work really well, and maybe all of them work, and maybe none of them work, and maybe we can be more effective. And I think one of the revolutions that's happened through measurement in the last 15 years is I think we found that some of these things have no impact on poverty at all. Vocational skills training programs have almost no impact on poverty at all. We spend maybe $100 million every 6 months as a society on that. No impact at all. Microfinance does many wonderful things, but it has close to zero impact on income and poverty, despite many people's hopes and aspirations and a very plausible belief. So I think what it shows us is that when we actually measure, we've learned some very profound things about things that we thought should work don't. And then we've found some things like what AVSI did that sound crazy and work really well. Another example is very simple, short cognitive behavior therapy for street youth. This is something I've worked on in war-affected societies, the hardest core criminals in society, whether this is inner city Chicago or inner city Liberia and Monrovia, drop crime levels by half after a very cheap 8-week course of group therapy with some of their peers. So I think there are limits to what we can know, but you know, the first ounce of measurement, which is what we have, is just is upending how large organizations operate. And I have a lot of faith in the second and third ounce. Now the 16th or 20th ounce, maybe that will start to no longer make a lot of sense. There's other approaches, there's other ways we can learn, but I think we're just starting.
Right. Thank you. There's so many other questions to ask where we don't have a lot of time. So I will limit myself just to one more for each of you, and that is this. You know, one of the beautiful things about the New York Encounter is how many young people come here from around the country, from around the world. And all of you, each of you has years of experience in your field addressing this problem, and each of you talked about how at an early stage you were motivated by a certain kind of youthful idealism, even perhaps of a romantic stripe. at a certain point. What would you say in just a minute or two to all of the young people here and all of the young people who have an idealism to try and use their lives to address the problem of extreme poverty in the world? What advice would you give them? Where to begin? How to think about what their own role in this should be?
The first thing that made the difference for me in all my struggle was when somebody told me there's the way it's possible to find the truth. It's possible to meet the truth. It's possible to find the way. My struggle was, what is the use of my life? Therefore, there's no need to struggle because this thing is not there. But the most surprising thing was when somebody say, imagine today where you are, you meet someone that tells you this is the way, the truth, and the life. And I was very surprised because I was looking for this, but I'd never thought that. Because imagine someone telling you now that this is the way, this is the truth, this is life. And I say, this is exactly what I'm looking for. This is why I'm here. Precisely because that moment, the idea of why do I don't have the fear? I don't have the fear because I discovered this, that there's a way, there's a truth, there's life, and that I'm not alone. I can face life because I can have an idea about life, but when I discover I'm not alone and I have someone to ask, even to make a decision, like I'm going to New York, I call a friend of mine, I have to ask, so what do you think? He says, what are the signs? If they refuse you the visa, of course, you know, you can't go. So I went to look for the visa, and they didn't ask me any question. They didn't even ask me an invitation letter. So it was a clear sign that I was to come here. I'm using this. Just that as you grow, as we move, if you find this, that you are not alone, there's someone you can ask. Because you fear, because your measure sometimes is small, and this is what I did. My measure was small, and therefore, sometimes I fear. But now, I'm so free, because it's not my measure. It's no longer my measure. It's someone else, and I'm free. I can take a risk. So this is the best thing that can happen, to find this. First of all, it's possible, and secondly, to find someone that you can trust. You can entrust your life, your questions, all the doubts, all the joys, and everything.
Thank you.
I guess the only thing I'll add is, I think along this theme of humility and approaching this with humility, is I would go to a place, I would get to know a place, I would get to understand a situation. So I would go with I would go with questions, not answers. And I would stick with questions and not answers for a very long time. And this is incompatible sometimes with youthful idealism. But it's truly important.
Great.
So I would add that for the young person, it's important to really be attentive to your interests, to all of yourself, and to keep open the questions that you have, not to be afraid of them, and to seek out people who help you to address the questions of what is your vocation, what is the life path that has been set out for you, and to keep that as a constant journey that you're on. And I would also just mention that the importance of relationships think we see over and again that poverty isn't just a material thing. So if we want to make a difference, it comes really down to relationships, and this is something that we can all pay attention to, practice in our lives. How we look at one another, how we treat each other. That whether you end up in a direct confrontation with poverty or not is something that changes the world, I could say.
Thank you. Well, for exactly that reason, and on that note, I guess it's good that we end with so many open questions to keep alive, even though we can't address them right now for lack of time, given all of the other wonderful events we have on the program for the encounter for the rest of the day. I'd like to thank AVSI in general for helping to make this panel possible and putting so much behind getting all of us here, and for all the work that has inspired this discussion. You can learn and see a lot more about AVSI if you go upstairs to the exhibit that is one of the exhibits of the encounter devoted to AVSI and AVSI's work on the second floor. I encourage you to see it. And other than that, it only remains to us to thank our panelists one more time.